Chris Oatley's ArtCast, episode 79. An interview with Robert Simons, concept artist for Ender's Game and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Part 1. Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Chris Oatley's ArtCast, the show that goes inside the hearts and minds of successful professional artists. I'm Chris Oatley. I was a visual development artist at Disney before I quit to start my own online art school, the Oatley Academy of Concept Art and Illustration. Find more art instruction and career advice from some of the most inspiring voices in animation, games, comics, and new media at chrisoatley.com. That's ChrisOatley.com. Whether you're into concept art, illustration, character design, comics, or storyboards, I'm constantly pushing you to create personal projects and pursue amazing collaborations. Why? The remarkable success of concept artist Robert Simons is why. Previously on the ArtCast, I interviewed the director and composer of Project Arbiter, an indie sci-fi short film with a big budget look. Robert Simons' work demonstrated a surprising level of maturity. He was only 19 years old at the time. Unsurprisingly, his resume now includes concept work on huge films like Ender's Game and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Visit chrisoatley.com/Robert-Simons, that's Simons, to see his work and connect with him online. And in the Q&A segment, my good buddy Matt Kohr from Ctrl+Paint joins me to respond to a listener question about whether you need to move to the west coast of the United States in order to become a concept artist. So Robert, take us all the way back to your earliest inklings of your own creative nature. When was the aspiration born?
Oh, God. Okay. That's going back really far. Well, let's see. I remember all the way back to when I was 4 or 5. I drew a lot, and I loved doing it. But as I got older, my dad was in construction, and I was in a very, a really realistic part of the world, because everything he did, I thought was the only job you could have as a kid. And I always thought that art itself was always going to be a hobby of mine until I think about the age of 14. And mind you, I never really stopped drawing too. Ever since I was a kid to that age, I always drew a little bit here and there. But I remember around the age of 14, 15, I suddenly started pushing myself more to draw. And I started to find classes online with my dad because he was helping me look too. And we found out that there was a school out there called Art Center, and they had these Saturday high classes for high school students. And it just sounded like a really good idea because I previously had been homeschooled for all of high school, and I hadn't had much interaction with a lot of kids during that time due to the fact that I have dyslexia. So it was actually affecting me a lot in school. I wasn't able to read properly and write properly, so I had to be homeschooled in order to pass high school. And that allowed me a lot of time to draw, but I needed to be around kids because it's been a long time since I had been around people, so it was really awkward at the time. So my dad enrolled me in these Saturday high classes, and from there I learned a whole other world of art I hadn't learned before, which was the commercial side of it, designing cars, designing products, and designing stuff for video games and movies. And it blew my mind. I didn't know that this world existed. I just started pushing towards that really hard and trying to be the best at it. Or at least back then I thought I was going to be the best at it. Then I soon learned that there's a lot of other people that are a lot better than me out there. So it was really awesome though, and changed my life learning about that school.
Yeah, no kidding. And you had told me just before we started the recording that you grew up in Riverside, California.
Mm-hmm.
And so what was that like as far as, did it seem accessible to you and your family? I mean, Art Center's not a cheap school, and
yeah. Well, I grew up out in Riverside, and my dad always pushed me to go to college, but we never knew what college I wanted to go to until I was like 14, like I was talking about. Growing up out there weren't a lot of art classes or anything, so I was always sort of on my own, just doing my own thing. And when we found it, it was, I didn't see it back then because I was a lot more young-minded, but with my dad, it was a really big thing for him because it was going to be a 2-hour drive every Saturday all the way out to Los Angeles to Pasadena to take those classes. But he was so motivated about the whole thing that he didn't even hesitate. He just said yes, and he started pushing me to take those classes. And, it was such a long drive that he would actually just wait out in the parking lot or go to a coffee station or something, wait 5 or 6 hours until I was done with class, and then come pick me up, and then we'd drive home for another 2 hours. Wow. And we did that for, I want to say we did it for 4 or 3 years. We did it for a long time. Like after I got into a groove of taking those classes, I just kept taking them, and he kept, forcing me to take them. And the nice thing about the Saturday high classes is they were cheap, and they're still pretty cheap in comparison to what the school is, and comparison to actually teaching a lot of high school art classes. They were like $500 to $300 classes, and they would last for 14 weeks. And they were really in depth, and the teachers are very good in those Saturday high classes too.
What was the transition like to Art Center College then at that point? How did that work?
Well, then when I finally graduated school, I spent about a year afterwards trying to figure out it wasn't a question of what I wanted to, that I wanted to go to Art Center. It was more of a question of what form of art did I want to take on.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah, and that really determined how I was going to enter the school, because I love doing vehicle design and I love doing product design, like designing cell phones and things like that. But my real passion lied in designing worlds. Ever since I was a kid, I would always invent worlds and invent stories and then start doing designs for them. And I didn't know it then, but really what I wanted to be was a director. But I didn't know that at that time. I just knew I liked designing stuff and designing worlds. It just so happened when I graduated school, I started hearing rumors from people in Art Center that there was a new department forming within the next year at Art Center that was pushing directly towards entertainment design. And the name of the department was going to be entertainment design, and it focused purely on movies and video games. But it took in all of the strengths of transportation design, product design, character design. It took in everything. It was basically all in one sort of thing, but more on the commercial.
Scott Robertson.
Yeah. And then that year in 2007, I actually met with Scott Robertson at Comic-Con, and I was so nervous and still really awkward at that time that I couldn't talk to him. And so my dad actually talked to him for me while I stood on the side, like super nervous at the age of 17. And he reviewed my work, but I was sort of standing behind my dad. And it was just, the whole situation was just so awkward and weird.
That's awesome.
But he basically just broke down my art in front of me. And that's sort of where it went. But I was so adamant with the idea of him remembering who I was that I emailed him afterwards asking if I could meet him at Art Center just to review my portfolio and talk about this entertainment thing and if it was actually becoming a real department or not at Art Center. I met up with him towards the end of 2007, and he happened to remember me because I'd been emailing him, and I made a really strong impression with him. And he just went through my portfolio, and he just told me, there is a department forming, and come back in 2008 and we'll review your portfolio for that department. And so I spent the next half a year, like 6 months or 5 months, developing a whole new portfolio. I didn't toss out everything I did prior in my Saturday High classes, but I started redesigning a new portfolio based on 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And I focused purely on designing like the characters, what their diving suits would look like, what Captain Nemo's ship would look like, the Nautilus, what the environment and the world would look like. And then I also took it the extra step with my dad because I couldn't write, and we rewrote 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea for that portfolio, and we based it in World War II. In any case, I built this whole portfolio around that. And I also took all my stuff from my Saturday High classes too, which were based around product and transportation design. And I took that with me and went back to Scott. And he basically sort of guided me and helped me and showed me like, oh, I need to improve this, I need to improve that. And I took in what he was telling me and improved all that stuff. And then when it came time, which is towards the end of 2008, I submitted all my stuff to Art Center and I got into entertainment design there. And yeah, that's pretty much the whole lineup of how I got into the school.
Did you ever feel lost or frustrated in having to address those notes from Scott, but then more or less having to do that kind of back at home?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is everybody goes through this, and there's tons of illustrators that are going through this right now too. But when you're very early on in the stages of, being accepted and trying to get into a place that you want to get into, you're going to face a lot of criticism. And I took it to heart back then, and it hurt a lot back then. Now it doesn't hurt quite so much because, in my day job working in films and movies, I'm criticized all the time. But, as a professional, I just have to take it and correct my work so they're happy with it. But back then, I remember there was nights where I'd come home and just cry pretty much because, I felt like I got destroyed. But then the next day I would realize it's like, well, no, he wasn't personally attacking me. They're notes to help me become a better artist at what my craft is going to be.
Yeah.
And I realized I was just being unprofessional during that time, and that I needed to be open to his criticism.
You'd no doubt been learning some fundamentals and everything at the Saturday classes. So you had some sort of way to affect those changes that maybe were a little less abstract than someone who hasn't been exposed to that kind of intellectual art instruction. Is that true, do you think? Or
yes, the Saturday classes prepped me a lot because they're Art Center Saturday classes, so they're prepping you for Art Center. But there's still a lot of stuff. And it's hard now looking back at it because it's been so long. I don't remember if I was taught the things I'm trying to remember or not in Saturday High, but there was still a big learning curve for me when I got into Art Center, which was really trying to nail down my perspective. And the thing is you think your stuff is really cool and you think your stuff is awesome before you go into a college like Art Center. But the whole purpose of a college like Art Center is to break you. And it's true. The whole idea is like you show them your stuff and they're like, that's interesting, which is a way of saying that it looks terrible, but they don't want to say that. Their whole goal is to break you down back to your roots of art and to build you back up off of what they know. And that's the only way you can be taught in art, at least as far as I know, is and as quickly as I was taught, which was you have to force yourself to learn how another artist does their stuff before you can become your own artist.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's how we always learn, right? From the moment we're toddlers, we're copying and then we synthesize and we make things our own. And
exactly. And that's exactly what I went through in Art Center too. That was some of the most difficult times. Is it was just, you thought you knew something and you may have known it, but right. Not that any of this is 100% correct. Not even what the teachers are teaching you is 100% correct, but it's a lot more valid than what you already know, at least.
Right. In your little kind of vacuum
exactly.
of your own little world. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's great. It's interesting, not to get ahead of ourselves here, but the World War II meets sort of sci-fi, steampunk, futuristic. There's kind of these flavors or potential flavors in this 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea project that perhaps are reminiscent, or that rather Arbiter is maybe reminiscent a bit of.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I don't know if you were going to get into this later or not, but Michael Chance contacted me back in 2008, at the end of 2008, right when I got into Art Center through my DeviantArt page. And at that time, my DeviantArt page had a lot of old work. And my DeviantArt page is actually still up if you want to see my progression through Art Center.
Yeah, I'll link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, and basically he contacted me because my website was pretty much built out of the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea stuff at the time, and he loved it. And he wanted Arbiter to be sort of based off of the suits that I designed for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And the Arbiter suit doesn't necessarily look like those now, but it was a good starting point. And it was a good foundation for what the project was going to look like in the end.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's just crazy that you did that so early. I mean, I think maybe you and I have something in common in that, and this is based on something you kind of said there before we started the recording, but, I spent countless hours alone in my room all the way from, middle school all the way up through high school, just drawing all the time. And I had some really good art teachers, even just in normal public school. Although I didn't have anything like the Saturday program at Art Center, I did have some really good instruction. And there's something about just that, it's the 10,000 hour rule, Malcolm Gladwell talks about, when you're just butt in seat, just drawing away. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah,
what you can achieve early on. I
mean, it's crazy. The whole process of art is obsessiveness. I mean, you just have to be crazy about it and force yourself to do these things. And then, once you thought you've hit your breaking point, you have to go beyond it and keep pushing, because it's the only way you can get better. It's the idea of art itself is just insane when you think about it.
Yeah.
How far you have to push yourself. And I think that's why, early on in the history of art, there were so many crazy artists.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Not to say that we're any different now, but I think it's a little bit more well controlled now, because we understand that factor, that you have to force yourself to these extremes in order to become successful in some way or fashion.
Yeah, and I think about this a lot, just how bizarre it is that the majority of the most influential artists ever to live, Miles Davis and Jackson Pollock, Vincent van Gogh, and they all had these chaotic lives, and they all died young, and that's terrible, and that's definitely a fate I want to avoid. But
same here.
The point being, though, that and I guess the reason I think about that so much is in trying to be a good artist and yet at the same time not go there, to maintain a balance in my own life. But there's this constant struggle of you're also trying to sell something that most people don't see as being a vital, I have to have that. Like, it's not like you're selling food or medical care or something. You know? And so it's tough. It's really difficult in that sort of back and forth all the time. You have to be so kind of remarkable to get any attention that it can turn into really soul-crushing obsession easily.
It easily can. And it's just, I think that was always the other part of art I didn't start to realize until after I got out of Art Center. But I think everybody goes through this at some point or another, but you start realizing that your craft is only really to entertain people. You don't do anything else except for that. You don't, at least I feel I've never saved someone's life, or something like that. It just doesn't happen. And that was something I had to get over for a long time too, is I almost felt like what I was doing was pointless for a long time.
And I think that's the beauty of the fact that we now have so much ability to do our own personal work. I definitely felt that way painting, fairies and planes all the time at Disney. And, no offense to people making, that kind of entertainment. There are tons and tons of, little girls learning valuable life skills, from the Disney fairies movies. I've actually talked about this on the show before, about how it's not that the final product is invalid. It's that my job I didn't feel
Yeah.
the impact and often enough. And then when I compared that to the feedback that I get and how often I'm told, that I'm making a positive difference in people's lives with the podcast and with teaching and everything, that was one of the main factors, that led to my decision to actually leave Disney. All this is to say that, but for visual storytellers, this is the beauty part, is that you're born to tell stories, and whether that's through an image or through words and images or whatever, some combination, that's the way you can really get to the heart. And I think that's the fire that so many artists have to do their own stuff, because they can actually contribute the emotional message of the narrative as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Like that's what I had to learn later on too, is that, that's partly why I want to direct now too, is I want to leave messages behind. I don't want to leave, even though I love to draw and I love to paint and stuff, I feel like I don't leave a strong enough connection to people or an impact behind me as to what it is that I want to say. And I feel like with, filming and directing, even with comic books and stuff like that, you can leave so much for people to take in, and it can actually change, not to say that we save anyone's life, but we can actually change people's point of views on things because of it. And that is so powerful to me to think of that.
Yeah. And, it's important also, I think, just for the sake of balance, to say that if you're working a day job and, you're starting to feel the pain of what we're talking about kind of sink in, it's also important to remember that it's not a platitude to say that, you can make wherever you are right now, you can make this place a better place, and you can improve the people's lives. There's all this, we're so obsessed with, getting more and more whatever Twitter followers and more blog readers and more eyes on our work and more Facebook likes and all that it's easy to lose sight of. It's easy to just have relationships turn into numbers. And this is something I've been trying to be careful about in my own life all the time. But it's important for those of you listening to remember that the 10 people that are paying attention, or the 6 people in your office or whatever, that's where you start. Start there, and then, because otherwise the struggle of making the comic or whatever is going to be miserable if you can't see the positive impact that you're having in the now.
No, I totally agree with that too. And
don't drive yourselves crazy.
Exactly.
Beware of Jackson Pollock's fate. Can we talk about dyslexia for a second? This is something that Brian McDonald has spoken about many times, and even on our podcasts, about how that has actually become a real benefit to him in his work as a kind of as a writer and storyteller and story guru, an analyzer and teacher of storytelling. And he talks about how, he can see the armature of things very easily, and that's actually common with dyslexia to you see the structure of things, and you understand, you look past the surface very quickly. Have you ever experienced anything like that, or does that seem to be true for visual art for you at all?
That's interesting you bring that up, because I've never thought that myself. But now that you bring that up, I could see how that would make sense to me in a lot of ways, because I feel like I can read people pretty easily. And that helps quite a bit when it comes to doing story. One of the big issues I have, though, is my writing is still terrible today. It's horrific. And my girlfriend, Peggy Chung, and she's also one of the co-creators on Momentum, and she's always around me and Mike and everything too. She's also a concept artist. She is really amazing at writing. And so me and her work on stories together, because I'm terrible at writing, but we're able to hit character stuff back and forth really well. And I feel like I'm able to help add character structure really fast to things. And I think it goes back to what you were saying too. It's just I feel like I can see some of those things a little bit easier, but I don't know yet, because I think a lot of it is I'm still pretty young and I have to live life a little bit more to see how dyslexia has helped me. I know for a fact though that dyslexia has helped me considerably in one way, and that is it's been such a challenge in my life to get through school and get through all these different things that I feel like there isn't much that can stop me anymore from doing certain things. I don't know. I just feel like it's really easy to push past an obstacle that's put up in front of me. Not to say that it's a breeze and I can go through it. An obstacle is always going to be an obstacle, but I feel like it's a lot easier. I feel like I can just look at it and be like, okay, this sucks. But if I go this direction, I can get around that obstacle and keep moving.
Yep. I don't know if you've read Brian's books, Invisible Ink and The Golden Theme, and then his most recent Ink Spots, but they're excellent. And he talks quite a bit about his experience in that, and and that, of course, that is the thesis of his, pretty much all of his writing work, all of his, storytelling work.
Wow.
But, it's this idea of the armature.
I need to look this up now. I didn't even know about this. That's awesome.
Oh yeah, man. He's on the 2020 Awards podcast a lot and has some great stuff on there. So
wow.
Those long painting days.
Exactly.
Give us a little. Mike did talk about momentum a bit on his segment, but unpack that a little bit for us.
Okay. Well, I can start a little bit from the beginning. Right when I was leaving school, which was back in 2011. Yeah, 2011. I left school because school ended, and I was also going through a lot at that time too because my dad had just passed away right when school was about to end, and I was trying to figure things out for myself because we were all living in LA together, and now that whole dynamic had changed because we couldn't all afford to live there anymore. So we all had to sort of split up and go into our own housing. So things would get pretty cheap for us, but we also had to start, I now had to get some sort of art job to maintain myself. And during that time, I was really depressed. But, now that I feel like I didn't have this burden of Art Center, and I was remembering all these things with my dad too, like just talking about story with him when I was a kid and stuff. Me and my girlfriend started doing that suddenly during that time because we'd been together ever since Art Center started. And we started talking about story stuff and started to talk about world creation and everything. And we just came up with this idea of doing, and it was Peggy who initiated it, doing a racing film. And we just thought, it'd be cool, to put all of our attention towards that and just come up with concepts. And back then we didn't know that much about story either. So we were just like, oh, this would be really cool to design some stuff for this. And then being naive, we're like, oh crap, we actually need story structure in there to keep people interested. We can't just put out pretty images. I feel like personally that doesn't really give you anything when you do that. And then anyways, throughout that year, we just kept tossing ideas around. And then we brought a friend on named Mark Yang, and he was really good at vehicle designs. And so it was now the three of us. It was me, Peggy Chung, and Mark Yang. And we all started to develop story structure, and we all started to develop vehicle stuff. And initially we started to take that project with another director. And because of just timing issues and things like that, we wound up just moving on.
And were you getting paid for that at the time, or was that had not turned into anything financial at that point? That was still purely just all on spec.
Oh, for Momentum? Yeah. Oh, Momentum's, no one's ever paid us for it at all.
There was no funding or anything.
Yeah, even to this point now.
Yeah.
Well, except for Kickstarter, but I'll get to that in a minute.
Right. Sure.
But we just kept working on the idea, and then I got the opportunity to work on Ender's Game at the end of 2011. And that was my first film job, really. So we all just sort of stopped talking about Momentum for about 9 or 8 months during the duration I was on that project. And I started to get really tired by the end of that film because it had pushed me so hard. And there was a lot of stuff to do on that project that I started to see the grass on the other side of the field and want to do a film project again. And I started to talk to Peggy and Mark and like, hey, we should all do a project together again. Maybe we should do that racing film together. And we all started talking. I'm like, yeah, let's talk about once you get back. So then when I came back from Ender's Game, we all met up and started to figure things out. And we wrote up some agreements among each other. And then the first thing that popped into my mind is like, none of us can direct this for the quality we want to do in the project. Like, we know we can handle the design stuff. That's easy for us. But we can't handle the directing aspect of it and get it to the quality we want it to. So we need to learn from someone. And that someone was a good friend of mine, which was Michael Chance. And I suggested it to Peggy and Mark. I was like, maybe we should just pitch this to Mike and see if he wants to help us direct it. And we can all work on the story together and get this thing figured out and bring him on as our director. And they all liked the idea. So we went to Mike and asked him, and he was really excited about it. So we all, I think in 2012 summer was when we really actually hit the ground running with Momentum, because we went and talked to him about it. And Mike was just so excited about it that for ever since the middle of 2012 till today, this point, we have been working solidly on Momentum. And in the middle of 2013 is when we actually started filming everything. For about a good year, we just talked about character, and Mike really guided us on that, what this character should do, what that character should do. And then we started to learn so much that we actually started to toss stuff back to him. And we developed this really good teamwork of all of us really thinking strong together. And then we also, during that year, we're also working on all the concepts and the designs of what the world will look like and the 3D models. And then finally it came time for us to actually put the money together to shoot this thing. And me, Peggy, and Mark all put together a pretty good chunk of money, but we still knew it wasn't going to be enough to film this thing. So we then put the Kickstarter together in 2013, literally a month before we shot. And it takes a month for the Kickstarter thing to go through, and then it takes another week for the money to come through. So we literally in 1 week tossed the Kickstarter together, put all the concept art together, did all of our interviews with everybody, and then we knew we also were going to need friends to help us make this thing popular too. And so that's when I went back to Scott Robertson, and I went back to Neville Page and Tim Flattery, who are all good friends of mine and Peggy and Mark from Art Center. And we asked them, would you be willing to put your name on this to get people excited about it? And they were more than willing to do it. And so we were able to use that for the Kickstarter, and we were able to build an extra 21 grand. And we went out from there and filmed all of Momentum, and it was just amazing to see it all come together. And it was just more than what any of us could have ever asked for. And even what Mike could have asked for, it was better looking than what he ever thought it was going to look like.
Wow.
And now we've edited the entire thing and started working on score, and we're still working on visual effects at this point now in 2014. And hopefully by the end of this year, we'll have something to show everybody.
Oh, it's so exciting. Project Arbiter has just gone up on YouTube, which is very exciting. So everybody can see it now. And so you essentially started, and all the listeners will know by now that this is how you, in fact, know Mike Chance. It sounds like you worked on that for quite a while.
At the end of 2008, I was just going through Art Center, and Mike contacted me for it. And I told him I couldn't do it until probably the beginning of 2009 because Art Center was so demanding. But I got obsessed with the idea after he told it to me. And I just started doing sketches for it.
He's a persuasive guy, too.
Mike is he's a very, very persuasive guy. But I really started, back then when he first pitched it to me, Arbiter was literally going to be a 30-second clip. And literally all he wanted was a helmet design. And me being me, I got obsessive over it, and I started thinking about more what it could be. And I think this is where me and Mike started to develop early story structure with each other. And not that I gave him any major ideas for Arbiter, but I helped develop the character's suit a lot more as to what it would be going through these World War II trenches and cities and stuff like that, and what it would need to do. And so I started sketching stuff out for the helmet, but I started sketching out more the rest of the suit and stuff like that. And then when I gave it back to him, Mike just got more explosive after that. And then he started to grow the story even more because now I gave him more than just a helmet. I also gave him a full suit. And the stories just started to expand like crazy from there. And so from 2008 throughout 2009, I designed the suit for him, and then he started to get it built by Blue Realm Studios.
Oh, right.
And And then he started to actually have story to give me. And so I started to take the story elements that he gave me in 2009. I started doing the concept art for what the feature of Project Arbiter could be like. And if you go to my website, you can actually, if you click on Arbiter, you can see all the concept art for it.
We will link to that as well.
And and I spent 2009, and then I spent 2010, and then I spent 2011, and then I spent 2012. And I think 2012 is when I did some of my last pieces for Mike during that time, because I think I was starting to get burnt out a little bit on Arbiter at that time. And then I was also burnt out because of Ender's Game and all that other stuff. A project can only drag on so long before people just get tired of working on it. But at that time, after the project ended, my love for Arbiter has only grown more for the project. And I'll support it as much as I have to, because I love that project. And it's a part of me because, I was young. I was 19, I think, when I started working on it. And now I'm 24 going on to 25 after working on it for all those years. Yeah. So, but yeah, that's how I got to know Mike and know Arbiter.
How did you know how to design stuff? I mean, your work is for being so young at the time, your work is so sophisticated.
Oh God. Well, thank you.
I don't see very many 19-year-olds doing, concepts that are this well realized.
Well, I was going back to my Saturday High classes. Okay, let me step back even further. I was hugely inspired by anime as a kid. And if you ever look up anime stuff, the stuff I was inspired by was like Cowboy Bebop, Evangelion, Ghost in the Shell, Appleseed. I was inspired by all like the early and late 90s tech type stuff. Yeah. And it's all very, it's portrayed as realistically as possible with a hint of like over exaggerated engineer parts and stuff like that that's tossed into it. And I think that form language naturally transitioned into my work. So I naturally gained a lot of my sensibilities and design from that, which I think was a good starting point. But then when I started taking Saturday High classes, the teachers were really good and they liked my work. But one of the biggest criticisms I got all through Art Center is that I over detail. And I personally still like to over detail because it feels...
That seems insane to me.
Well, I think it's because I grew up on job sites with my dad. And so I saw how like forklifts and how like backhoes and all those things worked. And so I knew you needed all these little nuts and screws and bolts to make things work. And so I tend to put more of that stuff in my work. And with artists,
awesome.
With artists, we usually try to make things as simple as possible to make them graphic so people are able to read it very easily. But I didn't know that early on because I only knew it almost from like an engineer standpoint because I grew up around my dad and also all that anime stuff. And my dad always pushed me to put more details in there because he would also do set plans sometimes. So he knew how to draw a little bit. And in any case, I just was over detailed. And that was one thing Art Center helped me with a bit. And I still know how to get to that over detailed state. But Saturday High helped me push myself by limiting myself, which sounds bad, but is actually a good thing sometimes because you can focus on making things graphic when you need to. And that actually learning all that in Saturday High and then that transition to me, creating my portfolio and everything for Art Center, I already knew some of those aspects, but Art Center just reinforced it even more. And it made me understand that, if you're designing a final product, most of the time you want to go simple because you want consumers and people to really understand your product and really be able to remember it. But you also want to put in some of that love that all the fanboys and the tech gurus are going to see and they're going to love it too. So that way you get, that's my own personal opinion. That way you get the best of both worlds. You get the average people or normal people that, want to see something that they can remember, but you also want to do something that people at JPL and NASA can remember too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, even the Arbiters Suit itself, there's this wonderful complexity, and then you have this one area of rest in that robotic Grim Reaper face, know? And what an amazing blend between, it's exactly what you're saying, this blend between the complexity and then this area of simplicity and the graphic quality that just punctuates that design and makes it, it takes it over the top. It makes it truly does make it something memorable. I mean, it's terrifying and awesome.
Wow. Thank you, man.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, a lot of that when I was 19, when I designed it, I honestly didn't know I was doing that. I was doing it more subconsciously. But now that I'm older, I'm able to break my work down and understand how I actually design. What's interesting is when you're younger, you don't know how you design, you just do it because you like it. But as you get older, you're able to break those things down and go, oh, that's why I do that, because I like these things from these animes, and that's something I never would have been able to do when I was 19. But, you know, looking back at the Arbiters Suit, like you said, I did exactly that, like what I was saying earlier, which is I was able to simplify the helmet and make it graphic so people could then draw it or do whatever they wanted with it. But then there's that element of realism underneath the suit, and that you can see, which is all the wiring, the cables. There's all the dirty grit of it that would exist in a World War II setting. Even though the helmet might be a little bit more sci-fi, it's tied in by the fact that the suit is so realistic looking.
Yeah, and quite unsettling at that. Next time on the ArtCast, Robert and I discuss sketching on mobile devices, how his personal projects have helped his professional career, and of course, how he got his gigs on Ender's Game and The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I've asked my good buddy Matt Kohr to join us for this Q&A segment. Matt, it's good to have you back.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks, Chris.
We have a question about moving, and I'll just read the question here and then we'll respond. But I want to say that I wanted Matt to join us first because he always has great things to contribute, but secondly because he has moved to the West Coast in somewhat recent history, and also and for the games industry specifically. So I'm hoping, Matt, you can weigh in on that in a way that I am not really able to do. The question comes from Justin Goodrich, and it says, I currently live in Middle Georgia, which I can't help but wonder if that's kind of like Middle Earth.
Yeah, it's Georgia, but 500 feet down.
Somewhere beneath the Earth's crust. I currently live in Middle Georgia as I work on my visual development portfolio. For the past 3 years, I have had little success. I know that my portfolio is the most important thing for conceptual design opportunities, but I am wondering how much location plays a part in this business. I can't help but notice that the majority of concept art opportunities are out west. I know it is not futile to keep trying. I am just a little curious about the practicality. If an employer liked my work enough, could they help me relocate? So it's kind of two questions. One is about the practicality of being in Georgia and do I need to move? And then there's this kind of secondary question about relocation. Matt, what are your thoughts on specifically on the games industry? And if Justin, we don't know if he's talking about animation or games, but if he is talking about games, does he need to move to the West Coast?
Yeah, I'll take games. You'll talk about movies, okay?
Sounds good.
Because I don't know anything about those. But so as an interesting side note, I moved to Middle Georgia in order to work in the video game industry. Right after college, I went to a studio called High Res, which is just outside of Atlanta. And that was my first game job. So there are, in fact, game studios, a couple of them, in Georgia. So that would be your first thing to look at. But beyond that, you sort of have the question of two lives, I guess. You can do the freelance life, or you can do the in-studio life. And if you want to work in a studio, those are often on the West Coast. There are some on the East Coast as well, but not as many clustered in Georgia. So your odds are going to be better in a sort of a nomadic lifestyle where a studio might, lay off 100 people and then you have to get a new job. If there's more in your area, it's just easier. You don't have to move. So for that regard, moving to the West Coast might be nice. Freelancers can live wherever they want. And so that is a valid choice from wherever you want to be, but they're two totally different lives. Like working in a game studio is a very particular day-to-day experience, and working in your house and drawing pictures is a very particular day-to-day experience. Yes, you're like drawing dragons in both, but I think they are two totally different people that want those lives. I mean, Chris, you work at home now and used to work in a studio. Would you say that they are different enough to be considered almost like different jobs?
Yeah, I think so. But it's a more interesting question, I think, now than it was even 5 years ago.
Why?
I've seen a trend where trying to cultivate a career as a freelancer is more similar to trying to cultivate a career as an in-house artist than it ever was before. So now I am oversimplifying, I understand that, but in a way it's kind of this simple, which is be a great artist that does the thing that you want to do.
So that's a technical thing, like how you go about getting the job. But what I'm saying is, like, say you've got the job, you are a freelancer or you are an in-studio artist. Those are two totally different pursuits, just like from an emotional standpoint. I think not everybody is set up to be a freelancer, for instance, working by themselves. They might not have the dedication to get up every day and do it, or, you know, they like being around people, whatever.
Right. You mean more of an intrinsic motivation. Is the intrinsic motivation there to stick with freelance, for example?
Yeah. I mean, like for me, when I hear about the solitary novelist that like sits in the woods with a typewriter, that sounds awesome to me. But I don't know that everybody feels that way.
Right.
So to me, being a freelancer kind of works with my personality. So technical stuff aside, that's a valid choice for me. Mm-hmm. But for some people, maybe you're just thinking about getting in the industry for the first time. It's easy to get hung up on the particulars of like how to make a portfolio, blah, blah, blah. But think ahead to the life. Like say you are the freelancer or say you are the studio artist. Does that sound fun to you? Yeah,
I know what you mean. It does not. I am not motivated intrinsically to pursue freelance jobs. Now, I'm not. That's not something I'm pursuing, obviously, because my job is the director of the Oatly Academy and has been for a while now.
Right, and that's weird and different.
Right, but I know myself, you know, and I know what I'm driven by. I think you have to want to freelance to really be kind of psychologically postured for a career as a freelance artist. Mm-hmm. The thing is that for most artists who are broadly just looking for work, I don't think that it's much different. And I think if you're in a place where you're like, I just want to work professionally as an artist, in a beggars can't be choosers kind of way, it matters less what you actually do now. And so I think either way you need to consider at some point, what are you emotionally, mentally wired for? But I don't think that is really the pressing question. I think the pressing question is, are you hireable as an artist in any context? You know, and I think that's the thing. Just like Justin said, you know, I understand that the portfolio is the most important thing for conceptual design opportunities. And I think that's the question, because you can kind of now you like Justin can just focus on a concept art portfolio and that's it. He can focus on making a great concept art portfolio, and maybe his first few gigs will be freelance or maybe they'll be in-house. Either way, he doesn't have to do much differently.
Totally.
You know, all he has to worry about is the concept art, is making a great concept art portfolio and send that to everyone. And then he can kind of at first just let the industry decide whether he freelances or whether he moves. Do you know what I mean?
Totally. And I guess if we're talking about that direction, from seeing portfolios come in, like being on the other side of the table at game studios, the portfolio is absolutely king.
Yeah.
The location is less relevant. You know, we at studios I've worked at in the past will maybe hesitate for a second if it's a choice between two identical candidates and one lives halfway across the country. It saves you, a couple $1,000 to get the local one. But in the big picture, you're not going to be equal, right? You're not going to have those two perfect candidates. So it's really the work that matters, not the location. They'll move you. It may be hard for you because you've got to move your family or whatever. But as far as their checkbook is concerned, they'll move you if they need you.
Yeah. And in terms of whether you're mentally suited for freelance or not, I would be just happy to have the gig. And then if I find out I hate freelancing, then that's a good problem to have, right?
Okay, I'll buy that. Yeah. Yep.
Then you can pivot and you can change and you can go, oh man, I really don't want to freelance it. But you can tough anything out for a while if you're working on an awesome game for fair pay, you can tough out the solitary lifestyle if you're not wired for that. Just to be able to get the experience that then will lead to whatever you're kind of looking for next. I can say that in animation, it is not common for studios to relocate you. I think I mean, it's just my opinion, but I think it's it's not like there are so few artists that can really do the job they're like, we got to do everything we can to sweeten the deal to make sure we get this person, because there is there I don't know if you have noticed this, Matt, but there are quite a few concept artists around.
I have noticed that, but I don't know, at least in games, the exact right artist, actually, there's not so many of those. Like you're often going for a really specific look, especially if you have a stylized game. And so if someone has a portfolio that proves that they have already made art that meets the criteria your game needs, that can be really appealing. You can look at someone who's got really great art and sort of extrapolate and think they could probably do the style that you need. But if you find that person that their portfolio is very specific and matches exactly what you're doing, that's an attractive candidate that you might want to move to get to your studio.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. And I don't think that's any different in animation. I think that's exactly true. And that's exactly why you get hired. But I just don't think they relocate very many people. If anyone knows differently, please post in the comments of the blog post that is associated with this podcast episode, which will be chrisoli.com/Robert-Simons, and share in the comments. If anyone has had an experience where you've had animation studios pay to relocate you, please let us know. I know I had a friend in graduate school who was a technical director, and if I'm not mistaken, I probably shouldn't say, but one of the studios, one of the big studios, the big animation studios, paid to relocate her. But she is the only person I know of that has been where the artist did not have to foot the bill for the move.
And I'd actually be interested in seeing in the comments for people who have thought they were about to have a game industry job. It looked like an offer, and then they refused to give it to you because you needed to be moved. I'd like to hear the opposite.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So does Justin need to move to the West Coast?
Not until he has an offer.
Yeah, right. If you can afford to just move to LA and whatever, couch surf, live on your friend's couch and go to Gallery Nucleus and the Center Stage Gallery and all those events that they do all over. The Academy does, as in the Oscars, they do events. I mean, there's so many great things happening in LA. If you can afford to go on a long trip or a series of short trips and just kind of make that work, I think it'll be, as long as you don't do anything foolish financially, I think that'll be a really positive experience, and I think you'll take a lot away from that. And theoretically, you could meet someone who could give you the job, and there might be some kind of kinetic energy, a definite benefit in being there in person. There's a reality to the fact that you're there and someone can shake your hand and look at your work. And, there's just an energy in meeting someone in person that could give you the upper hand than just the long distance portfolio submission. So I think there is a definite advantage in physically being there, but LA, not unlike Seattle, is very expensive. It's very, very expensive.
Yeah.
And there are just more people. So parking tickets, for example, not only are they more expensive than they are in, say, the Midwest, you get more of them. You get parking tickets more often because there are more people, and therefore there are more cops reinforcing, and on and on. And so it's just, that's the kind of thing that no one ever tells you. It's just kind of we had a friend when we first moved to LA. We had a friend that lived in Venice Beach, which is parking is extremely scarce there, and parking tickets are common. And he factored in to his automotive budget for every single year, I think like one ticket per month. Mm-hmm. Or something like that. And that was just part of his car budget. In the same way that you would budget for your car insurance, he also added to that parking tickets because it's just so inevitable.
Yeah, and for me, I have to pay for my parking lot, like for my one spot.
There you go.
That's like part of my rent. A big part of my rent is that, which is new to me coming from not big city.
Yeah, exactly. So those are the kinds of things that just it's hard to prepare for that stuff, because those are the things that are really hard to anticipate unless you've just lived there and paid attention to what it's like. They're also the things that can just take you out financially if you're not ready for it.
Yeah, because like your story of potentially go to LA and let exciting things happen, go to the gallery, whatever. That to me sounds like a good idea for a trip or a visit.
Right. But yeah, like a long visit, like a month.
Yeah,
for
but
example.
I hear about the sort of like fairy tale of moving out to LA to make it.
Right.
And if your portfolio is not like either borderline there or already ready to become professional, you'll get out there, your work won't be ready to get you a job yet. And then you have a lot of work to do, but you also have to pay huge living bills.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden it's like, well, I can't work my portfolio right now. I got to work 3 jobs. And to me, that doesn't sound like a great foundation on which to start your career, to just be in a terrifying financial situation. And were I living in Middle Georgia and I was not really sure my portfolio was ready, I would keep living the cheaper life and working on the portfolio until I was more certain, that I was close.
So as a short-term thing, if you have some savings and you really want to try and sprint, there are people who do that. It's definitely not my advice. Generally speaking, it is not at all my advice, but there are people who pull it off,
They're braver than I am.
Yeah, braver than I. I was so fortunate in that I had the offer from Disney. They called and they're like, "Can you be here in 3 weeks?" And it just happened like that. So, but I had freelanced. I struggled for a long time. You can hear my story. I'll link to some of my other stories for those of you who have not heard me kind of tell my whole story. I've got it in several interviews. So I'll link to those in the blog post associated with this podcast episode. So you can learn more about that. But, I did have the gig before I moved to LA. And even then I moved to LA by myself and stayed on my buddy's couch. And, I had the job at Disney, and I worked at Disney for 6 months. And then I was laid off, and as that it just happens, that's part of the reality of working as a concept artist. And I didn't get work at Disney again. I got some other cool gigs, which were all freelance. I didn't get another in-house gig again until I moved back to LA a year later. And it wasn't until I got back and people were like, "Oh, hey, Chris is back," and then the phone started ringing. So, I don't really know what my point is there, except that that's what happened. I didn't move initially until I had the gig. And even then it was sort of a dating period. I was dating LA to see whether I wanted to get engaged.
Man, well, games sound a lot different than movies.
Yeah, that's interesting. Are there any other differences that are coming to mind as I'm rambling on here that you want to point out?
Well, I guess similarity is that being in person, going to like the weekly meetup for the game developers in your town or whatever, being there, meeting people, shaking hands, that really does matter. So if you happen to live in a city where there are games being made, just like getting yourself out there does yield results. But I don't know that for me, that fact alone would make a move worthwhile if I wasn't like very ready to get a job there.
Right.
I think it's just an expensive gamble.
Yeah, a lot of it does come down to how good is your portfolio?
Yeah.
You know, how strong is the portfolio? You know, I can think of a few people right now that are coming to mind where I'm like, you know, if I were less responsible of an advisor, I would say you are fully hireable. I would hire you if I saw your portfolio. Just do it, you know. And I'm not that irresponsible. I'm not that cavalier to try and manipulate them into moving. But it's hard to say. And people say, am I hireable? Am I ready? Am I good enough to get that job? And you know, Will Terry and I did a podcast episode on this not too long ago called "Am I Good Enough?" And you know, we address that from a more emotional level. But there are people where you see them and they're so good, you're just like, yeah, you're so good. There's no reason you shouldn't be getting consistent work. But then they're like, I'm struggling, man. Like I can't, you know. So it's all a subjective thing. It's very, very difficult. But I guess my point is that, yeah, my advice is keep moving forward from where you are right now. You know, what's the next immediate step you can take? Just like Matt said, there are studios in Georgia, you know, so for Justin specifically, there are studios in Georgia. Oh, and I don't want to forget, go to CTNX. That is a great way to calibrate your mind to the expectations of the industry, what kind of competition you're up against. It's amazing how enlightening that experience is, and it's coming up in November. You can still get tickets. We'll again make a link in the blog post associated with this podcast episode where you can enroll. Go to CTNX because you'll have a great time. It's super inspiring. It's amazing, but you will get a really great idea of what the current kind of emotional temperature of the industry is, and you'll get in one weekend you can get a really good read on where you stand and where your work stands.
For games, GDC would be the equivalent.
Okay, cool. Where is that and when?
Gosh, the one I went to was in San Francisco. I think it's always held there, although I'm not sure.
All right. Well, we'll find out and we'll put the information in the blog post.
But very worth it. They've got a great job fair and, you know, lots of cool panels and stuff. Okay, great. GDC. Yeah. I mean, it's just amazing how much an in-person experience like that can give you, especially when you contrast that with what it's like to just stay in your... I know what it's like to feel so disconnected. Yep. You know, and you don't have to feel that way. Sure, going to Burbank and attending CTNX or going to San Francisco and attending GDC is not the same as getting a job at a studio in one of those cities, but it still is a sensory experience that gives you more information than we can even try to describe right now. Totally. Yeah, that's great. Well, Matt, please share with the listeners where they can find you and your goings-on, just in case they aren't familiar already. So I run a website called Ctrl+Paint.com, and that's CTRL, and it's where you can learn about sort of basic digital painting stuff. And then my personal work is at mattkohr.com. That's KOHR. If you have a question that you would like for me to answer on the ArtCast, please send an email to questions@chrisoatley.com. You can send a written email or an audio file. You can also call the listener line at 818-588-OATS and record a voicemail. And I love answering questions, so don't be shy. If you are an intermediate digital painter or a beginner who likes to learn quickly by being thrown into the deep end, then I encourage you to enroll in the very first digital painting course offered by the Oatley Academy of Concept Art and Illustration. In true Oatley Academy fashion, it has a snappy title. It's called The Magic Box,
everything I know about digital painting. In the Magic Box, I will show you every workflow, every technique, every time saver, everything I have developed over my past 8 years of professional digital painting experience, including my time as a visual development artist at Disney. The Magic Box will empower and equip you to paint lifelike human and animal characters, to control color, light, and atmosphere, to achieve a professional level of polish and dimension in your work, to avoid overworked paintings and the flat coloring book look forever, to increase your speed and efficiency with versatile techniques that will work in any painting. And of course, to break through the overwhelm of working in Photoshop. Plus, you'll have access to a huge community of passionate, focused artists with whom you can connect and collaborate. So if you want a clear step-by-step method designed specifically for concept artists and illustrators, head to chrisoatley.com/magicbox and enroll today. It's completely risk-free, and you get instant access to the first set of lessons as soon as you enroll. Here are just a few testimonials from current Magic Box students. @John Acuna says, @Chris Oatley, those lighting tutorials helped me make a major breakthrough today. 2 days of work done in as many hours. Thanks. @Frederick_S says, first time I've looked at a painting I've done and not wanted to scrap it ASAP. Thanks, @Chris Oatley. @Thousandfold Art says, @Chris Oatley, that less lesson changed my life, dude. #MagicBox. And @Drake Studio says, the Magic Box courses from @Chris Oatley have made me question my entire digital art workflow. The learning, it hurts. Hurts so good. Love you guys. Yes, so head to chrisoatley.com/magicbox to learn more, to enroll, and we would love to see you join the Oatley Academy. Well, I'd like to welcome back to the ArtCast the inimitable Matt Kohr.
I like that title. I want that on my business card.
That's a callback because I couldn't say inimitable on the last time you were on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, you're welcome.